They think he's going to be good for votes, and I think he's very bad for votes. These people are deranged. He's not good for votes. He beat the hell out of his wife. His wife is afraid to even talk about him. She's been mauled by this animal.
So as most of you guys probably know, the Trump administration at this time is underwater on almost every single major issue. And if there is one issue that they have completely dropped the ball on, it is either immigration or deportations. This has been one of Trump's calling cards ever since he came onto the political scene back in 2015. And if there is now one face that really symbolizes the cruelty, symbolizes the incompetence, symbolizes the absolute hatred that this administration has shown towards the immigrant community, it is probably that of Kilmar Abrego Garcia. And if you guys have been following along with the channel, you'll know that we covered this story very, very closely. Because basically what we had is a United States government rounding up people without any due process and then shipping them off to a gulag down in El Salvador. Kilmar Abrego Garcia was a father from Maryland who was caught up in one of these immigration sweeps. And even though the administration came out and admitted that they made a mistake in sending him to El Salvador, they decided that they were going to drag him and his family through the mud anyways. And so there are some new developments in his case that I want to go over, but I really think it's important that we provide more context to Kilmar Abrego Garcia's story. And I want to go ahead and start off with this clip because there are so many people out there that want to say that Kilmar Abrego Garcia was in this country illegally, when that is just not the case, as this clip will explain. If you guys do appreciate my work, please do remember to subscribe.
Abrego Garcia was in the country illegally. However, in 2019, an immigration judge withheld his removal because he had been the target of violent gangs in El Salvador. Abrego Garcia did have a permit to legally work in the U.S. when he was taken into custody on March 15th. Now, court records show he regularly checked in with immigration officials and was never charged with a crime.
So this is very, very important, everybody. Kilmar Abrego Garcia fled El Salvador when he was a teenager because he was scared of gang violence. And even though he came into the country illegally at first, when he got in front of an immigration judge in Trump's first administration, that judge determined that there was a credible fear from gang violence, that he should not be returned to El Salvador. So that judge in Trump's first administration granted him protective status to be in this country and said that you are not allowed to deport him back to El Salvador. But what did this administration do anyways? They rounded him up in March. They sent him down to El Salvador, and they let him rot there, even though one of their lawyers in court admitted that this whole thing was a mistake. But because this administration didn't want to say it was wrong, because they didn't want to own up to their mistake, they allowed this man to go down to one of the most notorious prisons in the world and rot. Just think of how twisted that actually is. Now, back in America, people were fighting to get him back home. And even the Supreme Court had to weigh in, where they said you need to facilitate his return from that El Salvadoran prison.
Yeah, breaking news. The U.S. Supreme Court says the Trump administration has to facilitate the return of a Maryland man mistakenly deported to El Salvador. Kilmar Abrego Garcia is in prison in Central America. ICE admits it deported him because of an administrative error. Despite that, the Trump administration is defending the deportation, claiming without evidence that Abrego Garcia has gang ties. He is a legal U.S. resident, married to a U.S. citizen, and they have a young child together.
So the Supreme Court weighs in and says, hey, what are you guys doing? You guys need to facilitate his return. Your own lawyer admitted that this was an administrative error. What are you doing? But the Trump administration dragged its feet. They played games with Bukele. Bukele came to America and tried to say, oh, well, nothing we can do. We can't release a terrorist. We can't release a gang member back into society. Nope, well, no, our hands are tied, guys. Donald Trump pretended that his hands were also tied, saying, oh, well, that's Bukele's decision. They dragged their feet, and they dragged their feet, and they dragged their feet, even after the Supreme Court said that they needed to bring him home. because this administration didn't want to admit that they made a mistake. They didn't want to appear weak. Just think of how twisted it all is, guys. This guy had protection in the United States from being sent back to El Salvador. He had a job. He had a family. He was raising disabled children. He was checking in with ICE when he was supposed to. Was never convicted of a crime. And now he's sitting down in El Salvador, rotting in a prison with gang members who would probably like nothing more than to harm or kill him. And that was done at the hands of the United States government. So because the Trump administration wasn't making any good faith efforts to get him back, we actually had Chris Van Hollen travel down to El Salvador, which was really kind of a turning point in this whole thing, even though Bukele tried to stage some sort of Margaritaville type photo. Chris Van Hollen traveled down there and tried to visit Kilmar Abrego Garcia. He was turned away the first couple of times, but he was able to meet. And this was one of the press conferences after that meeting.
This is a lesson into the lengths that President Bukele will do to deceive people about what's going on. And it's also shows the lengths that the Trump administration and the president will go to, because when he was asked about a reporter about this, he just went along for the ride. So the White House and the president have been lying about this case from the beginning. They've been trying to change the subject from the beginning. As I said, and the courts have said, from the Supreme Court to the Fourth Circuit to the District Court, what this is about is adhering to the Constitution, to the right of due process. And that's why we say, bring Kilmar home, so he can be afforded his rights under the Constitution. That's what this is about.
And Chris Van Hollen is absolutely right. That's what we were all asking for. Just bring him back home so he is getting the due process that he is entitled to through our Constitution. The Trump administration tried to slander this man, tried to say that he was an MS-13 gang member, that he was a human trafficker, that he was some sort of terrorist. They weren't able to provide any evidence that any of these claims were true, and because they didn't want to admit their mistake, they let him rot in a prison until Chris Van Hollen went down there and started exerting a shit ton of pressure on the whole situation. And I truly believe that it was Chris Van Hollen and other Democrats that traveled down there. It was people like you and I who were speaking out against what this administration was doing to Kilmar Abrego Garcia, that eventually he was able to be returned to the United States. And I was hoping that it would just end there, right? I was hoping that he would be able to go through his immigration proceedings. If this administration wanted to change his protective status or his work status or whatever, at least he would have the due process and be able to put up a fight against those claims. But no, instead of that being the case, when he got back to America, they charged him with new crimes. Because again, this is an administration that doesn't want to look weak, that doesn't want to admit a mistake, doesn't want to admit it was wrong. And here is the press conference of Pam Bondi announcing these new charges.
The grand jury found that over the past 9 years, Abrego Garcia has played a significant role in an alien smuggling ring. They found this was his full-time job, not a contractor. He was a smuggler of humans and children and women. He made over 100 trips, the grand jury found, smuggling people throughout our country, MS-13 members, violent gang terrorist organization members throughout our country. Thousands of illegal aliens were smuggled.
So, he gets back into the country, and he is charged with these new human trafficking charges related to smuggling illegal immigrants. This was all based on a traffic stop that happened in Tennessee. I think it was a couple years back. At the time, nothing happened. At the time, there was no charges brought against him. So it looked like this administration was kind of fishing for anything that they could throw at the wall to see what stuck. They brought these claims in front of a grand jury. They were able to get an indictment. And on top of that, you had the Attorney General of the United States, Pam Bondi, instead of just sticking to what was in the indictment, she went a step further and continued to slander Kilmar Abrego Garcia's name.
The defendant abused undocumented alien females, according to co-conspirators who were under his control while transporting them throughout our country. This defendant trafficked firearms and narcotics throughout our country on multiple occasions. They were using vehicles, SUVs, with added seats in the back, floors that had been ripped out, guns, narcotics, children, women, MS-13 members. That is what the grand jury found.
Except no evidence was provided for any of those claims that she just made. So they're slandering him as a human trafficker, a child abuser, a woman abuser, saying that he was trafficking weapons, all of this other nonsense that wasn't in the indictment. This was a clear attempt by this administration to try to dirty the picture of Kilmar Abrego Garcia. That is what this was all about. They tried to slander him, saying that he was a wife beater, even though there is no charges against Kilmar Abrego Garcia for those crimes. He was never convicted of any of those crimes. He doesn't have any of these types of convictions on his record at all. So, is Kilmar Abrego Garcia a perfect guy? Probably not. Are any of us perfect? Did he beat his wife? Did he lay hands on his wife? That we just don't know. We just don't know, and we don't have evidence for that actually being the case. But here you've got the Attorney General coming out and slandering his name the best that she knows how by attaching all of these other heinous crimes to what was not in the indictment. It was a vindictive act because this administration didn't want to admit that it was wrong. So he's sent to El Salvador. He finally gets back to America. He's charged with new crimes that looks like a fishing expedition. One of the lawyers in that office in Tennessee ended up resigning because he didn't like the way that the administration was going about this. They have not gone through the entire process, so we don't know if any of these claims are actually true or if any of this evidence is actually going to stack up. But that's where we stood then. And then he was trying to maybe look at getting bail, trying to get out of prison while these charges were pending. These new charges in Tennessee were pending. I think he ended up, for the first little bit, he ended up wanting to stay in prison because he was afraid that this administration was going to go after him again. But after a few months' time, he ended up getting released on bail, I believe it was. He was able to be released from federal custody for these new crimes, which that clip goes over here.
Afternoon, Kilmar Abrego Garcia, the man who the Trump administration admitted was wrongfully deported to El Salvador, has just been released from federal custody. This is video of him walking out of the detention center in Tennessee where he had been held. Abrego has become one of the faces of President Trump's national immigration crackdown.
So she didn't necessarily say that he got out on bail, so I don't want to 100% commit to that. I do think he got out on bail in some way, somehow. And so you've got these new charges in Tennessee that he is now fighting. He finally gets out on bail. And what does this administration do? We've got Kristi Noem coming out and saying shit like this.
So the fact that he was released was not a surprise to us based on what we thought could potentially happen. But the fact that he showed up for his hearing today means that we have an opportunity as well to continue to go after him and keep him off of our streets.
So here you've got Kristi Noem, the director of Homeland Security, or whatever her title is, vowing to go after Kilmar Abrego Garcia now that he is out of prison. It just doesn't stop. They are trying to make an example out of Kilmar Abrego Garcia, somebody who has not been convicted of any crimes, somebody who was wrongly rounded up And even the administration admitted they made a mistake. Sent to a gulag down in El Salvador where he claims he was tortured. And you've got an administration as vindictive as can be, just pursuing him every chance that they possibly get. So he is let out of jail down in Tennessee. I think he's given 48 hours to make it back to Baltimore, which is where he is from. He needs to check in with ICE there. And that is exactly what he did. And I'm guessing you guys can imagine what happened. They took him into custody again. Here's his lawyer speaking after he was detained.
There was no need for them to take him into ICE detention. He was already on electronic monitoring from the U.S. Marshal Service and basically on house arrest. The only reason that they've chosen to take him into detention is to punish him. To punish him for exercising his constitutional rights. His constitutional right to fight back against being illegally deported to El Salvador. His constitutional right to speak up through his court filings on the torture and treatment that he received in El Salvador at the direct request of our government. His constitutional right not to allow his arm to be twisted to take a guilty plea if he doesn't want to. His constitutional right to exercise his right to a jury trial on his criminal proceedings if he so chooses. And his constitutional right and his right under the Bail Reform Act to leave the prison and come home to his family. He's being punished for exercising those rights.
So they take him into custody again. And what's being reported now is they were trying to get him to plead guilty to these human trafficking charges in Tennessee. And if he did that, well, then they'd deport him to Costa Rica. But if he didn't, well, we're going to send you back to El Salvador. Which is just not how any of this should work, guys. We should not be leveraging deportation against a criminal case like this. That is just not how this shit is supposed to work. If they were serious about these charges of human trafficking down in Tennessee, then why aren't they seeing this case through? If they have the evidence to prove that this guy is such a terrible guy, why aren't they following through with the prosecution so they could hold him accountable right here in the United States? Does any of it make any sense? If they had the evidence, wouldn't we want him to be held accountable here in the United States in our system? No, but instead, they tried to twist his arm, tried to get him to plead guilty and to be deported to Costa Rica. And I'm sorry, I misspoke earlier. Instead, since they're not allowed to deport him to El Salvador, they said if he doesn't take the deal, then he would be deported to Uganda, which is a country he has just no connection to at all. It is punitive. They are trying to punish this man for their mistakes. The United States government, everybody, if they had the evidence to prove their claims against him, why wouldn't they follow through? That's why there's a good argument to be made that they are just trying to make an example out of Kilmar Abrego Garcia. All because they didn't want to admit that they made an administrative error in sending him to El Salvador. This is twisted shit. It is vindictive. It is malicious. All because Donald Trump is a petulant man-baby who doesn't want to admit that he was fucking wrong. We're tearing families apart, guys. Kilmar Abrego Garcia isn't the only one that this kind of thing is happening to. And as I will reiterate, do we know that Kilmar Abrego is a perfect guy? Of course not. Has he done some wrong in his life? Probably, just like we all have. But we don't just get to make accusations against these people and then lock them up based on those accusations without having to prove it. That is not how the rule of law is supposed to work. And now you've got Donald Trump in the Oval Office this week, hiding his bruised hands and his exploding cankles, saying shit like this.
And why are the Democrats so emotionally attached to this man who beats his wife and is part of a terrorist organization?
Because they think he's going to be good for votes, and I think he's very bad for votes. These people are deranged. He's not good for votes. He beat the hell out of his wife. His wife is afraid to even talk about him. She's been mauled by this animal. And, through a system of liberal courts, he's doing things. But, no, we have that under control.
So listen to the language that he's using here. His wife was mauled by this animal. These liberal courts, oh, they're letting him do things, blah, blah. Oh, is the Supreme Court, now they're a liberal institution? He is slandering Kilmar Abrego Garcia's name, saying that he is a wife beater, even though they have not provided evidence that that is actually the case. There is no conviction. I'm not saying it did or did not happen. But when you've got the President of the United States sitting behind the Oval Office desk and espousing shit that could or could not be true, that is just not how things are supposed to work in the United States. All because Donald Trump didn't want to admit he was wrong. All because people like Stephen Miller are controlling this administration's immigration policy. And he wants to make a point. He wants to make an example of somebody with brown skin. It is grotesque, and every single person involved in stripping away due process and the human dignity and rights of Kilmar Abrego Garcia, every single one of them should be held accountable. These are human rights violations, people, at the behest of the United States government. So that is where we currently stand today, guys. He was out of jail for 5 days, I think it was. He was able to travel back to his home in Baltimore. He was told to check in with ICE, and they arrested him under the guise of some sort of interview. Clearly trying to make an example out of this guy, because this administration is too chicken shit to own up to their mistake. We should speak out every single chance we get about this nonsense. We have to resist what this administration is currently doing to our immigrant community. And every single one of these fucks involved, they must be held accountable. So, I will leave it there for now, guys. If you guys got anything out of this video, please do remember to smash that like button and subscribe. Maybe share with a friend or two. I'd very much appreciate that. We've got to build something here on the left that pushes back against this right-wing media ecosystem that just tries to slander people like Kilmar Abrego Garcia day in and day out without caring at all about the facts on the ground. So if you do like what I do here, please do remember to smash that subscribe button. Of course, that is free right here on YouTube. If you guys want to go a step above and beyond that and help me produce these videos, you can become a member right here on YouTube for as little as $3 a month. Or you can jump over to politiscape.substack.com and you can have my videos delivered right to your inbox every single day without the doom scrolling, without all of the algorithmic bullshit. That's a cool way to get the content delivered as well. And I get I own all the data over there, which is a really nice feature about Substack. So I guess I'll see you guys on the next one.